Hello, I'm Maya Sanders, the FVPSA coordinator with the North Carolina Council for Women. FVPSA stands for the Family Violence Prevention Services Act. This year, I was privileged enough to coordinate the 2016 FVPSA Grantee Conference, which we held in Concord, North Carolina. Representatives from all 92 of our grantees showed up at the conference to discuss the most current topics related to domestic violence, family violence, and intimate partner violence. The FVPSA conference was 2 days. The first day we designated for our 13 Prevention Program grantees. The welcome and opening remarks for day one was presented by Ms. Gail Wilkins, the Executive Director of the North Carolina Council for Women, followed by the introduction of presenters by our Deputy Director, Mary Williams Stover.
So you make the decision why you're here. And then we realize already, if you've already been doing this before you involve yourself with Maya and the FVPSA project, you're already motivated. You already have the perseverance. You already have the stamina. And so what we want to do is give you just a couple of tools to make it easy and better for you.
It's been so much time talking about intervention, right? But today it's about putting the P back in FVPSA. We heard that. We heard that in San Diego. We're putting the P back in FVPSA, prevention.
The plenary session for day one was Prevent Violence NC, a strategic approach that was presented by representatives from the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
So part of what I do as a prevention program specialist funded through a CDC grant called Delta Focus is look at what's happening in our communities in North Carolina, do some evaluation, really begin to understand what is working in which communities, why and how, so that we can begin to really rigorously evaluate those programs and make them available for others.
The plenary session was followed by a FVPSA grant update that I gave to share with the prevention programs nationally what FVPSA is doing and how it could affect prevention programs that are funded in North Carolina. We'll talk about serving boys and men. So that's something for all of us to start to consider. At the national level, they feel like it's very important, and we certainly agree that there are male victims. A lot of times you hear us talk about serving women and children, but we don't necessarily talk about targeting male victims. We don't talk about serving male victims, but it's time that we start because otherwise we as a state will be left behind. I'd like to especially thank our new Secretary of the Department of Administration for taking time out to come to hear more about FVPSA and to meet our prevention grantees. Secretary Catherine Johnston, we thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine Johnston. I'm the Secretary for the Department of Administration for the state. And I'm really just here to say thank you and support what you're doing, and so that you know that on behalf of the governor and the administration of the state of North Carolina, we thank you for what you do every day.
Following a day of training, we hosted the FVPSA Networking Reception. This networking reception offered all of our grantees an opportunity to meet each other, to mingle with the speakers that were scheduled for the following day, and also a chance to meet the Council for Women staff. Day two was a full day of training and networking for the grantees. I opened the conference with a welcome. So I'll introduce Ms. Gail Wilkins. She's our Executive Director.
Thank you, guys.
This is our Deputy Director, Mary Williams Stover. Our Eastern Region Director, Linda Murphy. Project Administrator for COPE, our Human Trafficking Expert, Karika Yarbrough-Smith. Our Southern Piedmont Region Director, Elise Hamilton Childress. This is Ashley Bass Mitchell. She also works with Project COPE, Human Trafficking. She's been outstanding help for me as well. Karika, thank you for letting me borrow Ashley. This is Jackie Jordan. She is a grant administrator with the Council for Women. Sharon Springs, she is FVPSA. She has emailed probably everybody in this room 3 or 4 times a day. She helps with everything I do. This is Sharon Springs. This is the Northern Piedmont Region Director, Bernetta Thigpen. We had opening remarks by our Executive Director, Gail Wilkins.
That we have an outstanding program, and that her team in Washington, D.C. thinks she's doing a magnificent job. And we at the Council for Women, we think she's doing an excellent job as well.
And then an opening session by Betty Coles on diversity in domestic violence training and advocacy. Betty Coles is the organizational effectiveness consultant with the North Carolina Department of Administration.
I'm going to talk about domestic violence in the workplace. This is becoming more and more of a topic of interest because it's impacting the workplace in such a big way.
Following the opening session, we had concurrent joint breakout sessions. Topics included, are human trafficking and domestic violence really that different? Presented by Karika Yarborough-Smith of the North Carolina Council for Women, Project COPE.
I typically think as soon as you say human trafficking, well, they all have substance abuse issues. That's not true. Not all trafficking victims have substance abuse issues. Some of them have been forced to use drugs by their perpetrator and then they're dependent on them. Some of them use it as a coping mechanism. If you're having to sleep with 20 or 30 men a night, sometimes that's one of the other things that happen. And then sometimes it's just trying to deal with things, after the fact.
Why do children in shelters act like that? Presented by Jeannie Preisler from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services.
With adults have these serious side effects, like gaining like 30 pounds. So you're dealing with this child who is dealing with all this adversity. The drugs they might be taking are changing their brain chemistry. The neglect or abuse is changing their brain chemistry. And you're maybe 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. Your executive functioning is not online. You're going to make these bad choices.
Save Yourself First by Linda Murphy, Eastern Region Director with the North Carolina Council for Women.
A great leader has great people beneath them so that you can relax some and just delegate the authority. You got to learn how to do that.
Educating, Empowering, Expanding by Jackie Jordan, Grant Administrator with the North Carolina Council for Women, and Cynthia Manley, Executive Director of Faith Essentials Financial Literacy Coaching.
When we had dinner when I was growing up, my mother, one of her biggest values was that when you had dinner, you had to have dessert. Well, I don't need dessert now because I'm too big. Okay, but I feel like though sometimes when I cook dinner, that if I don't have dessert, I don't have a complete meal. Does anybody hear me? That's a value that she instilled in me with meal planning.
FVPSA and Council for Women Statistical Reporting by Brianna Van Stecklenburg.
I just want to go a little bit into each section on the FVPSA report and talk a little bit more in detail, especially in the next section, which is about the duplicated and unduplicated. I know there's a lot of questions on that. So I'm just going to go through every section in a little bit more detail. So the first one is the general program information. And for each section, I put a little screenshot of what the actual report looks like at the bottom so that you know what I'm talking about.
Sheltering and Serving Male Survivors by Elise Hamilton Childress, Southern Piedmont Region Director with the North Carolina Council for Women.
Which kind of talks about the cultural stereotypes that we've traditionally had about what a man is supposed to be like and what a woman is supposed to be like. So what kind of descriptors, cliches, adjectives go into man?
Following the breakout sessions, we had lunch. And at lunch, we had a keynote speaker by the name of Janaquay Williams. Janaquay's speech was titled, What the Surveys Don't Tell You, a message from a survivor who lived in your shelter.
If you have not walked through that person's shoes, you can't understand how they feel. Please be more empathetic and sympathetic to a person's needs. Please understand what they need and what they want.
After lunch, we participated in a peer-to-peer panel discussion. Representatives from each one of the 4 regions in the state and 1 prevention program were represented on the panel. Fundraising was discussed by Junie Christensen from the Onslow Women's Center. Succession planning was discussed by Captain Brent Phelps of the Shelter Home of Caldwell County. Voluntary services was talked about by Liz Mason from OASIS. Community outreach was discussed by Sangeetha Menon from Kieran, and rapid rehousing was discussed by Kanika Turrentine from Infinite Possibilities. Round robin activities were next. We offered 25 tables with 25 different topics, and our grantees were allowed to choose what topic they wanted to discuss and sit at that table for 15 minutes. This year we did something different. We offered our grantees a marketplace. In the marketplace, grantees were able to meet vendors who offer services or products that the shelters or the prevention programs can use in their programs and their agencies to better serve their communities. Marketplace vendors included Eastern North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking, Diaper Bank of North Carolina, the North Carolina Domestic Violence Commission, SHAMSA Vazone, the North Carolina Department of Correction Enterprises, Melissa Siegel Barrios, and Mecklenburg County Community Support Services Forward for Love Youth Group, Monica Tubb and the Myers Park High School Domestic Violence Awareness Club, and Chris Roncone and the Marvin Ridge High School Ceramics class. Well, that's an overview of our 2016 FVPSA Grantee Conference. I'd like to especially thank the people who put their time and energy into making this conference a success. I'd like to thank Secretary Johnston for taking time out to learn more about FVPSA and to meet our grantees. I'd like to thank our presenters, our vendors, and Ms. Gail Wilkins, the Executive Director of the Council for Women, and the Council for Women's staff. Thank you. Hope to see you next year at the 2017 FVPSA Grantee Conference.